In this section, we're going to be learning about the essentials of JavaScript. We're going to take a look at the most basic unit of JavaScript, and we're going to look at the different data types that are available to us to build upon and build our code out of. So those are strings, numbers, and booleans. So those are going to be covered within this section, and those are the most basic data types. And data types within JavaScript allows you to switch data types. So it's not that when you define a data type, a variable with a data type, that it has to stay that way. You can redefine it and you can have dynamic different data types for those variables. So you can update that directly in the code. And you're going to find that JavaScript is very versatile. It's very easy to use. So when you try to write code, JavaScript tries to render it out as best as possible and anticipate what you're trying to do with that code. And this is where JavaScript variables also become really important, because this is one of the most fundamental units of programming, being able to store a value in a variable and then call to that variable at any point within the script. We're able to update, reuse those values as needed within our JavaScript code. In this section, you're going to get familiar with the different data types and how they work and how you can use them within your code. There's also the prompt. We're going to show you how you can get input and connect JavaScript to what's happening with your web users and allow them to actually input a dynamic value that you can use as a variable directly within your code. So this is the first step in creating that interaction between your code and your web users. We're also going to look at different operators. So we're looking at the assignment operator, arithmetic operators, comparison operators, and logical operators. Operators in JavaScript allow us to ask a question and get a Boolean value in return. So we know that it can either be true or false. With a comparison operator, with logic operators, we can add multiple conditions together and tell if they're true or false, and then do something with that Boolean value. We're also able to assign values. So we can increment it, we can add values together, we can divide them, we could subtract them, we can multiply them. And all of these are arithmetic operators as well. So there's plus, minus, multiplication, divide, and modulus. So all of this and a whole lot more is going to be covered within this section, and it's going to get you started with the most basic units and to start your foundation for coding JavaScript. Welcome, and in this lesson we are going to be looking at primitive data types. So these are the most basic building blocks of programming languages, and we're going to be looking at specifically strings, numbers, and booleans. So strings are a representation of a set of characters. I've opened up my Chrome browser, opened up DevTools, and gone to the tab console, and this gives me a place where I can actually write JavaScript without creating any source files. So this lets me use the runtime within the browser that basically renders out the code instantly. So I can do things like what we saw before, where I type in hello, and I can see that that gets rendered out immediately. So we wanted to look at strings, and strings are essentially a representation of a consecutive set of characters wrapped with quotes. So we saw that when we placed this alert, we've got this hello here. So this is actually a string. And also, strings can also include spaces, they can include numbers, and any character that's available within your reach, you can add in here and add it in as a string. So let's take hello world, and notice that I've got a space in there, so I'm wrapping it with quotes, and we get returned back that value that gets returned back. So essentially this is a string value, and it's as simple as that to hold string values. Now we also need to make sure that the quotes match, because up here I've used a single quote, over here I've used a double quote. So you can use either or. You can also use single quotes and you can see that the returned result comes back as double quotes because this is the returned result. So it doesn't distinguish between single and double, it just returns back that as a string value. So that's the important thing to note with strings, and when you are using quotes, make sure that you use the same one, because if you're not finishing it off with the same one that you opened it with, then you're going to get an error and the program actually isn't going to know what to do. So make sure that those match. So we know with programming, everything is broken down into really simple units. And that's where primitive data types, it's important to understand what's available and what you have to work with. When we are programming, we are creating a set of instructions, and we need something in order to describe the things within the code, within those instructions, and that's where we come across different data types. So predominantly we've got a few basic primitive data types, and then everything else in JavaScript are objects. So next, let's look at numbers. So numbers are very similar to strings, but we're limited to only digits within numbers. So we can do any number that we want, and we can see that number gets returned back. We can do a 4.4. So it doesn't matter if you've got decimal places, if you've got fractions, you can see that everything gets returned back. And it actually returns it back as a decimal point. So we had 4/8, or also 4 divided by 8. So we return back 0.5. So we can have fractional numbers, we can have decimal numbers, we can also have negative numbers. So it doesn't matter, all of them are counted as numbers, and that's the type of value, the primitive data type that we're looking at when it comes to numbers. So I do have a trick question for you. So we saw earlier that strings have quotes around them. So what if we have a number and we've got quotes around them? So what data type is that? Is that a number or is that a string? And if you've answered string, then you're correct, because as soon as we place those quotes, then that stops being a number, it stops being a numeric value, and it actually turns into a string. And we're going to look more into this as we progress through the upcoming lessons, when we look at variables and how we can hold various numbers within our variables, and also various string values within our variables. So what I want you to do now is take a moment before we jump into variables and open up your browser, open up your console, and try out writing out different string values and also different number values, and check it out for yourself. And in the next lesson, we're going to be jumping into variables. So that's coming up. Welcome back, and this is where things get more interesting, because we're going to be looking at variables. So variables give us the ability to store data and recall it later. So earlier we saw how we created a bunch of strings, and every time we want to recall this string, we had to go back and type it again. So this isn't very useful, especially in programming, because we want this dynamic ability in order to store data, to manipulate that data, and then recall it often within our programming. So this is what variables do, and variables are one of the fundamentals of every programming language. You need to be able to store that data, and variables give us that container in order to store that data. So just like with algebra, and where you're storing some type of value, and let's say x is equal to something, you do the same thing for variables. You use var in order to declare the variable, so that the system actually knows that you're actually declaring x as a variable. So all you have to do is place var in front of the variable that you want to declare, and then assign x a value. And we're going to use the assignment operator, so this is just an equal sign, and then whatever here is here on the right hand side is going to be the value of x. So let's give x a value of 5, and we see that we get a response back because we're not looking for a response quite yet. But now the interesting thing is when I type in x, I get a value of 5 associated with it, and that gets returned. And you're probably also wondering, well, where do the data types fit in? Because with JavaScript, you don't actually have to define the data type. So we've got what's known as dynamic typing. And basically what this means is that if we've got a variable that's being declared as a number, then that variable is actually going to be a number variable. And if we have it being declared as a string, then y is going to be a string value. So, and we can also even switch between values. So once we've declared x, we don't have to specify var anymore whenever we want to reassign a value to it. And this happens very often as you're programming. You want the numbers to change, the stored values to change, and this is where programming really gets a lot of power. So if I want to take x, and for instance now I want x to be 10, I can recall x, and x holds the value of 10, and I could just as easily switch it into a string. So if I didn't want the numeric 10, and if I wanted character 10, then I can switch the data type, and JavaScript is fine with that. There's no problem with switching the different data types depending on what the variable is. And of course, if you've got that within your program and you want to make sure that you're not switching it if your program always wants x to be 10. So this is something you've got to establish once you're creating your program, but it is acceptable within JavaScript to switch between the different types. Now there are a few rules when you're creating variables, and some of those rules I've got listed out here. So it is case sensitive. So if I do an uppercase X, we get this X is not defined because we haven't initially defined and declared X at any point, or the uppercase X. So if I do something like var X, and now I type in the uppercase X, I've got that one, and I've got the lowercase x, and I can even assign a value to the uppercase one. So if I wanted 10 for uppercase and the written 10 for lowercase, I can do that as well. So it's just as easily, just make sure that when you are naming your variables, they are case sensitive. So watch out for that. There's also some rules as to what the variable can be. So you can't call it variable and use a reserved word such as alert. So that's not going to work out. Another thing that you need to avoid as well is starting with a number, because if you have a variable and you want to call it 4, notice that with JavaScript, or I should equal it to 4, we see that with JavaScript, the numbers, we don't need to quote around them. So this is where we need to be mindful of the fact that JavaScript wouldn't know which 4 this is supposed to be, if it's a variable 4, or if we're just recalling the number 4. So make sure that you're not starting with a number. You can have something like variable x4 if you wanted to, so you can include those digits in there. So we can equal that to 4, and this is fine. JavaScript's fine with this as well. You can also start variables with an underscore, so we can name it underscore x, and we'll just give it a value of 5, and we see that that's fine as well. We can also start declaration or the variable name with a $sign. So this is often used as well, where we've got the $sign and we've got the characters. So we've got $x, and that's the variable name. So you do have quite a bit of flexibility with names. Another thing to keep in mind whenever you're naming your variables, typically we do use camel case. So basically what that means is if you've got a number of words such as my value, we start the second word with an uppercase, and if we have another one, my value name or something like that, again, we start that one with uppercase, because you can't have spaces for your variable name. So if you have my value, that's not going to work. And we see that already. Chrome turns it black because it's not understanding that this is one name as soon as we place that space in there. So avoid spaces as well. And you're fine as well to make them really long if you want. be also mindful of the fact when you're recalling them, if you've got a really long character set that's defining the variable name, then this could be a problem as well. And that's just simply from a usefulness perspective that you don't want to have something that's really long. So again, we're just going to declare this one as 5. And if we want to recall that back, we can recall that back and get the value returned back. And the scope of the variables, this is going to be globally available. And this is going to become even more evident why we're calling them global variables when we come to functions and we start looking at local variables within functions. So global variables basically mean that we can access this within functions as well and make use of the values that we're setting, that we're declaring as var my value, and we can pick that up within a function. So what I want you to do now is practice declaring variables. So this is really easy to do. Be creative. Try out some different names for variables. Keep them camel case. Make sure that you are case sensitive, that you are aware that the case matters for the variable names, and also make sure that you're not starting with letters, digits, and that you're keeping to letters, underscore, and $, and that you're not including any spaces in the name. And try it out for yourself. So open up your browser console and try creating some variables and then recalling those values, and then even try to overwrite those values with something new and then recalling those back as well. So re-establish a value for it, and then you can recall it. So try it out, something like variable 1 and equal it to 1, variable 2 equal it to 2, and so on. And just get yourself really comfortable with writing variables and familiar with the different rules associated with variables. And in the next lesson, I'm going to show you even more with what we can do with variables. And it's really important to be comfortable with creating variables, because these are going to be the very basic starting point for any application where you need to hold data and you need to hold values within those variables. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to dive deeper into variables and also data types and look at Booleans. So I did mention that one of the primitive data types were Booleans, and it didn't really make a lot of sense because those are all true or false. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to type in false or type in true unless we actually start looking at variables. So that's why we introduced variables in the last lesson. So let's create some basic variables. So we'll have one that we're going to call my string, and we're going to give this one a value of hello world. So this is just a typical character set for a string. Next one we'll have my number, and this one will hold a value of 100. So that's a nice round number. And next we'll have my Boolean. So this one can either be true or false. So for now, let's just set it as true. And these will become more apparent, the usefulness of them, as we progress and as we look deeper into conditions and looking at different comparison operators. So now we've got our strings, we've got our numbers, we've got our Booleans all set up. And I'm going to go back out to the page. I'm going to just refresh this. And now I can call back number, I can call back my value, or I think I could call it my string. And we can see that we can return back all of those values that we've set within the application. So this shows you the usefulness of writing your code down within a file, because you can always recall it and you can set some values and you can interact with those values within the rest of your code. So establishing variables, usually done at the start of whenever your script is being initiated, because the whole idea is that you want to set those parameters, those initial starting points, those initial starting values that you can work with in order to write out all of the different logic for your program. So we've looked at Boolean, and I did mention there was a few other primitive types that we haven't looked at as of yet. So let's just set a variable, and we'll just call it my none. And I'm actually not going to establish a value to that. So let's refresh that. And when I try to recall it, it's there, but it returns back undefined. So undefined is actually another primitive data type, and this one is just holds one value, and that's undefined. So basically, if you've set a variable, but you haven't defined a value for the variable as of yet, then it's going to come back undefined. And undefined is actually different than null. So if I was to equal this to null, we'll just do that lowercase there. So if we equal it to null, and if I refresh it, and let's see what the value of my none is, we can see that we're returning back null. So null is a special type, and these ones as well are both primitive data types. So null only holds that one value, and basically it doesn't point to any valid value. It's just null. So if you want to set something to be null, but you don't want that to come up undefined, there is a difference between those, and if you just don't want it to hold any type of value. And lastly, there is also a way using JavaScript built-in method, and we're going to come across quite a few of these as we go through the course. And these are pre-built methods or functions, and basically they execute a set of code behind the scenes. So much like what we saw with alert, when we're typing in the alert method, we've got another one where we can actually define and find out what data type it is. So we can use type of, and we can do the my none, and we can see that my none is an object. Let's do the my string. We see that type of my string is a string, type of number is number, and type of my Boolean is a Boolean value. So there are the primitive ones, and then everything else is an object, and we are going to get more into objects as we progress through the course as well. So this is a useful method because in case you all of a sudden you switch the my number and you switch it to a string value, so just switch it to a string value. Now if I do type of my number, we see that it's being returned back as a string. So this is going to be, these types of built-in methods really become useful, especially if you want to make sure that the variable that you're pulling in is a number. You can do a check to see if the value of it is a number, and if it isn't, then you could do something to convert it into a number, or if it is a number, then you can go ahead and execute your code. So once you start applying a logic within your programming, it becomes really important and really evident how you can use these different methods that are built into JavaScript to really power up your program and apply application logic. And before we finish up, I did want to mention one other thing with strings. So we saw that we've got strings and we need quotes around strings. So there is a rule that we need to follow if we want to pluralize. So if we want to have quote worlds. So this will work within the double quote environment. So if I go back out and if I refresh and if I call back my string, we can see that we've got hello worlds. But what happens if we actually want to do a double quote around worlds? So what do you think we can do there? Because at this point, we're going to have two double quotes and we're actually breaking out of our string value, and we can see that the editor brackets is picking this up and it's making it black. So basically we can see right away that there's some type of error there, that there's something not right. And the way to fix this is to use backslash. So backslash gives us a way to use escape characters. So now if I go back out and if I refresh it and if I get the value of my string, we can see that we get the return value and we've got the double quotes in there. So this is the same thing for single quotes. So if I, for instance, had a bunch of single quotes around here, and brackets is trying to auto-complete those single quotes for me. So that's why I got to be really careful that I'm just adding the 1 in there. So this time I need to escape the single quote, and let's refresh and we'll try this one out again. And we see that that worked fine as well, and it actually ignored the backslashes for the double quotes, so it kept them in as double quotes. So you got to make sure that if you are using any type of these special characters such as the quotes, that you always do the backslash in order to escape that. There is another challenge as well. So what happens if you actually want to include the double slash within your string values? So what if we had 4 and we want to have something like this? Actually, that's not a fraction, but let's say, for instance, you had this backslash there. So what do you think is going to happen now? If I want to actually include the backslash, we see that it actually breaks out of the string value and it doesn't show us 6. So it just continues. So basically what happens when you include the backslash is that we get this type of character here. And it's if we want to include the backslash itself, we could just double backslash and refresh it. And now if we get the string value, we see that we get the backslash being output there. So that's how backslashes work, and that's how you're able to escape your special characters within your string values. So take that, try it out for yourself, and try out this rule as well. Create some strings with some special characters like quotes, double quotes, and single quotes. Try it out for yourself. Even try to do adding in a backslash within your string value, and try it out for yourself and get familiar with creating strings, numbers, booleans, and some of the rules related to strings. So in the next lesson, we're going to be jumping into prompts. So prompts are going to provide us an interesting way to actually take some input from the user and utilize it, hold it within a variable value, and then make use of it within our code. So that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back, and this is going to be a really super exciting lesson because we're going to create some interaction with JavaScript. I've got my browser open here to index.html. So I've got that one open here on the right hand side, and I've got brackets, my script editor, here on the left hand side. So what I wanted to do is create interaction using JavaScript. So first of all, let's start out by creating a variable. And this is also going to illustrate how useful variables can be containing information. So we're going to say, what is your name? So basically, we want to ask a question that we want to get a response for. So this is just a basic question. It can be any string value that you want, and notice that it's contained within a string, and we're just asking that string value, so the quotes around it. And now if I go out to my console, and I'm going to actually open up my console, and I'm going to open it up at the bottom because I want to keep it all within that same page for now. So let's refresh this page, and now when I type question, I can see that I've got access to the information contained within the variable. So the next thing that I want to do is I actually want to ask for a prompt. So let's show you what prompt does. So this is similar to what those other methods did when we looked at alert and type of. So this is another built-in method that's ready to go within JavaScript, and it's got a set of code that's going to execute behind the scenes. So it knows what to do when you type in prompt, and I'm using the variable question and I'm dropping it into prompt. So let's see what happens. So when I press prompt, we get a pop-up type window here popping up, but we've also got that question there. So this is actually the value that's coming from the question variable that I've entered into prompt, and this is the format of prompt. When you add in a string value over here, it places it here at the top, and then we've got an input field here where we can input some information. So I can type in and we see that we get a returned value. So much like what we saw earlier when we were looking at the data types, when we were typing in different string values, we get those returned values. We saw that we can also add in something like my name, and we can assign a string value to it. So we could do it like this. And now when we type in my name, then we get that returned value. So this we can take one step further because we see what prompt is actually returning back is the result here of that prompt pop-up box. So it's returning back into the value, just like what we saw over here. When we call back to my name, we get the value back. We get the same thing here with question. So we can use that within a variable and we can store this information, essentially capturing that information, capturing that user's response. So let's try that out within our editor. We're going to do my name and we're going to equal it. So that's not going to be a value. So this is going to be a dynamic value that we're going to be picking up, and we're going to use the prompt method. So basically this displays that pop-up message box, and we could just as easily take our string value here and we could enter it in prompt, but that wouldn't make it dynamic. And the objective of JavaScript is that we want to write nice clean code that's easy to read, and we try to separate out as much as possible when we write code. So over here we have a distinct function here, or distinct value here, that we're setting a question, and then the next one we're using prompt and we're utilizing that question from that first variable. So let's save this and let me show you how this works. So now when I get asked for my name, I can type in my name, and now when I call back to the my name variable, I've got a value that's being held in there. And I can use this over and over and over again as many times as I want. So lastly, let's actually do one more thing here that I didn't show you earlier, but I also want to introduce in this lesson how you can concatenate together various string values. If we had a second part to the question and we had something like question, and let's just do question 1 and question 2. So we want to keep out the your name, and that's what we're going to add in the second part of the string. So we wanted to maybe have our string change, and we want to make something different happen within the string. So in case we want to change it from your name to your age or something like that, we can just as easily change that over here. So this is the latter part of the question, and we've got this question mark. So we know that every question is going to have a question mark, and maybe we can include your over here as well, and we'll just keep the age down here at the bottom. So lastly, how do you combine them together? And again, we can turn to variables, and variables are the answer to this as well, where we can equal question. So just as we did with the prompt, we can use the returned response. So we saw we've got a returned response. So we've got return response for question 1 and return response for question 2. The first one is what is your, with a space here at the end, and the question 2 is age. So we can just as easily concatenate them together. So when you use the plus sign, you're not adding to them together, you're concatenating two string values together. And then lastly, let's add in that question mark. So I can create another string here at the end, and when I go back out and if I refresh it, then we've got that full question there concatenated together. And this is one of the ways we can begin to use different variable values and utilize them within our code by simply setting another variable using the initial variable values, so that we know within our code we don't necessarily need to, maybe we only want to change this one value of question 2, and we can change it back to name or what is your favorite color or something like that. We've got a lot of flexibility here in the second part of the question. And if we had the ability to change it dynamically, we could do even more, where we could have something like one of the prompts would be, and maybe in here we're going to ask, so question. So we're going to essentially have two prompts. The first one is going to ask us what question we want to ask. What is your, so either age or we're just going to say age or name as an example. And then over here, we're going to bring it all together, and then we're going to ask another prompt with a question. And then lastly, we're going to place an alert here. So let's try this out first. So refresh it. So what type of extension do we want to add to this question? So let's do age, and we see that we can dynamically change that prompt. So we've got what is your age? So we'll just say an age in there. And now we see that my name has the value of 40, and notice that it's a string value as well. So I want you to try this out for yourself and combine what we learned earlier. And the challenge here is going to be to ask a question, pick up the response for the question. So ask a question, ask the person's name coming into your website, and then build a welcome message, an alert welcome message, responding back to the user as they enter in their name coming into your web page. So pause the video, and on the other side, I'm going to show you what the solution to that is. And think back to the different methods that we've used within the earlier lessons where we used alert, and use that in combination with the variables and the prompt, and you should be able to come up with the solution in order to create that welcome message to users to your website. So I hope you had the opportunity to try this out for yourself, and now I'm going to show you the solution. So most of the work is already done here, where we were trying out all the different variations for the question and so on. So basically what I wanted to do, we'll just keep it as what is your name, and I'm going to use comments here, comment this out, and I'm going to change this one to question. So what is your name? It's going to prompt question, and then lastly we need to add in that alert method. So let's output an alert, and here we need to combine a string with the my name response. So welcome to my website, and then let's add in the name there that we picked up from the response. So basically, let's do a quick run through here. So we're creating a string value that's asking for the name. We're utilizing that variable within the prompt, where we're setting another variable with the response back from the prompt. And then lastly, we're using alert. We're concatenating one string value here, which is a message, and then we're concatenating it to the response that we get back from the prompt. So let's try this out and see how this works. So what is your name? And let's type in a name here. And then we see, welcome to my website, Lawrence. So there you go. So I hope that you got an opportunity to try that out. And I do encourage you to try out different variations, combining variables as well as the prompt and alert, and see what types of different functionality you can create coming into your website, creating some interaction between your web user and your script. So coming up, we're going to look at even more we can do with JavaScript. Welcome back, and in this lesson we're going to look at arithmetic operators. So basically they're going to give us the ability to provide some arithmetic on numbers. So this is only working with numbers. In the previous lesson we saw that if we had a number of strings, then we could actually combine them together. So we could set up a variable, let's call it my string, and we're going to equal it to a, and then we're going to equal a space, so plus that one, so there's another string, and then lastly let's just do b. So we know that the value of my string, so when I go back and if I refresh it, and if I want to get the value of my string, it's going to be A concatenated with space concatenated with B. So this is how we can add strings together, but we can also use operators such as the plus sign to add numbers together. So if we do something like this, so I'm going to call it my total, and I'm going to equal this to 5 plus 5. So notice that we've got a couple numbers there, and when I refresh this, and if I want the value for my total, I can see that it's 10. So this is the same thing that if we go out into the console, we do 6 plus 6, we can do 4 plus 6, and we see that it does the computation. We can even string a number of values together, and we can even have some larger numbers, we can have some decimal places, and so on. We can even have really long numbers. So basically, it's going to return back whatever the computed result is from all of these together. Now, it does work as well within the order of operations. So basically, if I had 5 plus 5 and then I multiply with 5, so let me show you how that works. So we get my total, and we see that 5 plus 5, so it's taking the order where we're doing multiplication, division first, and then we're doing addition and subtraction. So what's happening here is we're doing 5 times 5, so we're getting 25, and then we're adding 5 to it. And if, for instance, we want to do 5 plus 5 first, then we could add in the brackets, so I could do 5 plus 5. And then here is where I'm going to multiply it by 5. So what do you think the total here is going to be? And if you said 50, you are correct, because we're taking whatever's within the brackets first, and then we're doing the multiplication. We're doing the stuff outside of the brackets afterwards. So that's where the multiplication is actually done after the addition or the subtraction. So just as we were doing 5 plus 5, we could do 9 minus 5, and so on and so on. So I think you get the point here that we can do any number of arithmetic. We can do multiplication. We can also do division. So if we want to do 9 divided by 3, so we use that forward slash, and not to be confused with the backward slash, we use forward slash, and this is where we can get the total. So we can work out any type of value here, and we can construct total and get that response turned back in here. And we could just as easily set up these as variables. So if we had a equals 5, we have variable b equals 10. If we do a plus b, so if we do a plus b, then my total is going to be, and we're going to actually output this within the console. So going into the console log, so that I don't have to always type it out there, we're going to console log out whatever the value of the total is. When we go back out, refresh the page, and we see we've got 15 coming in there. So there are some other ones that you might not be as familiar with, and another one that's commonly used within JavaScript is called modulus. So that's M-O-D-U-L-U-S, and this is the percentage sign. And basically what this does is this returns the remainder. So we try to put A into B as many times as we can, and then whatever the remainder is, then that's what's going to get output there. So let's try this out, and we'll refresh the page. So we get a total of 5, because we're trying to put that smaller number into the bigger number, so it's going to go that one time. So typically when we're doing this, we do something like this, where we're going to reverse it, and we're going to have the bigger number with the smaller number going in there, and we see that the total is 1. So basically we're trying to fit A into B as many times as possible, and then whatever remains. So if I change this to 3, what do you think the output now is going to be for my total? And if you said 3, you're correct, because we can fit 5 in there twice, into b twice, and then we get a remainder of 3. So 5 minus 13 is 8. 8 minus 5 is 3, and that's where we're getting that total of what's left over. We can also increment numbers. So we could do another one here where we can increment b, and I can also decrement a. So subtracting 1 off of it, and I'll log those values out so we can see what the values are of b at this point. And this is a good use for a console log whenever we've got any values or variables that are changing, that we want to see what it is before the change, and then we want to see what the value is after the change. So let's go out and refresh it. So we see that b coming into this line of code, line 13, gets a result of 13 because that's what the variable is initially set to. We increment it, so the increment is just by increment of 1. So next we print out b again, and we see that it's 14 now. So now we're looking at the value of b, which is 14, and we've got a value of a, which is no longer 5 because we're subtracting off of it. So the value of a now is 4. So we're doing 14 modulus 4. So 4 goes into 14 3 full times and leaving 2 left over. And this is also very useful if we're detecting if a value is odd or even. So we can do something like this, and if we have a value of 0, we know that the number is even. If we have a value of, I'm just going to change that to 12, so that we get a value of 13, and if we get our return of 1 on the modulus, we know that the number is odd. So this is one of the uses that is commonly done for modulus, and this is how we change, determining if a row, for instance, that we're outputting is odd or even, and there's a number of other uses for this as well. So what I want you to do now is open up your editor and start adding in some numbers there. So create a number of variables that have number of values there, and set those up and create an addition of those, also a subtraction, and so on. And lastly, let's take what we learned in the previous lesson with prompt, and let's ask for a first value, and then we're going to add that to a second value, which we're going to ask for as well. And then lastly, let's output that total into the alert. So pause the video now, and I'm going to show you the solution to do that, taking in what we've learned within this lesson and the previous lesson, and I'll show you the solution coming up. So pause the video, try it out for yourself, and I'm going to give you the solution in just a minute. So I hope you had the opportunity to try this out for yourself, and let's take what we learned in the previous lesson, and I'm going to overwrite some of the content that I have here. I'm going to just use the prompt, and I'm going to just do first number that the user wants to use, and next we'll do prompt again for B, and then this will be second number, and I can get rid of some of this stuff here. So the total is going to be A plus B. So just do A plus B, and instead of console log, let's just alert this information out. So I'll alert out that total. So let's try this out, and I don't need the string part up here, so I can get rid of that. And let's open up our browser, refresh the page, and we'll try it out. So first it asks us for our first number, so let's pick a number, do 4. Second number, 6. And then we see that the total is 46. And this was a trick question because we know that when we're taking in prompts, we're taking in string values. So we're not actually taking in numeric values. And basically what that means is that we do need to change the type, because if we do type of, and if we do A, we know that, I have to hit OK there. If we do type of A, we see that it's a string, and we actually have to convert string to a number. And there's a number of ways to do that, and the easiest one is just to specify that A is a number. And now if we do type of A, and actually I have to set A to equal number A. And now let's try this type of, and we see that we're getting back a number. So now I'm able to add, so I have to convert, do the same thing for B. So I would have to do B equals number, and we need to convert B into a number. And let me add that equal sign in there. So B, and now I can do A plus B, and we see that we get the result that we're looking for. So there's a number of ways to apply this, and I'm just going to apply it here when we're creating our total here. So we're going to do number A, number B, and save those as numbers. So let's try that out, refresh it. So the first number is 3, second number is 7, and we see that we get a total of 10. And let's also add in total of 10. So do try that out for yourself, and remember, if you are working with numbers, you do need to make sure that the type is a number. So taking in what we learned earlier, that all the prompts are returning it back as strings, so we need to convert it to a number. So use this type of method built in again within JavaScript to convert a string into a number format. So coming up, we're going to look at assignment operators. So that's coming up in the next lesson. Welcome back, and in the previous lesson we saw how we can work with arithmetic operators. So this one we're going to look at assignment operators. And we've already used one of the assignment operators, and the one that's most commonly used is the equal sign. So basically this gives us the ability to assign a value to a variable. So this is an assignment operator. If we want to take this one step further and we want to do B, but here instead of doing B equals B plus 5, we want to start out with whatever the value of B is and equal it to itself plus the value of A. We could do it within this way as well. So basically we don't already have a value of B quite yet. So maybe we need to assign a value of B. So we'll give B a value of 4. And then over here is where we're going to reassign a new value for B. So this is essentially the same thing as doing B equals B plus A, because we want to keep that initial value of B. We know that B is equal to 4. Over here, we're reassigning a value to B, but we're using its existing value, which is 4, and then we're adding a value of A, which is 5. So we're going to get a value of 9 now for B. And this is the same thing over here, but this is just a shorter format, and this is just using the assignment operator plus equal sign. So it's going to get returned back the same results. So these are both going to return back a value of 9. So let's try that out. Go back out here and refresh it. So let's do B equals B. So we're reassigning a value to B, and we're equaling B equals itself plus the value of A. So we're getting a value of 19 because we actually did execute these two out, and that's what's going on there. So let me try that again. So we're going to do, this time, let's do it within the assignment operator where we're equaling. So we're doing B equals B plus A, so a shorter format, and we're turning back 9. So this was the same thing as doing B equals B plus A. So now, because we've already got 9, when we assign another value of 5 to it, we end up with 14. We can also do the same thing where we've got that assignment operator of adding. We could subtract the value of A. So we see that B now has a response back as 9. So we know the value of B is 9. We can even do multiplication. So we can reassign the value of B and we can multiply it by the value of A. So we see that now we've got 45 because we're doing 9 times 5. So that's 45. We can also do, instead of multiplication, we can do division. So that would bring back the number back to 9. So a number of different things that you can do. You can even do the modulus of that as well. So the value of B and B modulus of A, and we see that we've got a returned value of 4 because A is going to go into B one time, so that's going to leave a remainder of 4. So that's basically what the short format for that one is going to be. So now try it out for yourself as well. Try out all the different assignment operators and try to use these short forms. So set up one with the longer format and give it some time, play around with it, and try them out for yourself. So try out the shorthand for adding one value to another, shorthand for subtracting one value from the original value, multiplying, dividing, and modulus. Because these are going to be really useful operators as you do your programming. So open up your editor and create some of these operators within your JavaScript code. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at comparison operators. So these are operators that are used within logical statements, and they give us the ability to determine and compare the difference between two different values. So we're going to use the two variables that we set up in the previous lesson, and we're going to do a comparison of those. So let's save that, bring that out into our console. And I've got a value of A, which is 5, a value of B, which is 4, and let's do a comparison operator. So it's different than the assignment operator. We've got one equal sign, and what we're doing is we're looking at if A is equal to B. And we get a Boolean response, which is false. So if we do A is equal to B, but we do B is equal to B plus 1, we see that A is actually equal to B plus 1, so that's true. So because they're both equal to 5. So another really interesting one, so I'm going to set up a variable and I'm going to set up a string this time, and a string value of 5. So now we've got a value for C, which is a string value of 5, value of A, which is a numeric value of 5, and let's see if A is equal to C. And surprisingly, we get back true, because the actual values contained within these variables is going to be true, but the only thing that's different is the type. And that's where we add in a third equal sign. So this gives us the absolute comparison of A and C, comparing the type. And if we do this one, the three equal signs, we get return back false. We can also do a comparison and check to see if A is not equal to B. So what do you think the result here is going to be? Is A not equal to B? And if your answer to that is true, you're correct, because A is not equal to B. We can also do an absolute not equal to as well. So if we had a value of A and we're comparing it to B, and let's add in that bracket because we know that B plus 1, making it 5, would be equal to A. So this is a numeric value. So we're checking to see if it's absolutely not equal to B, and we see that return back false because it isn't equal. The type is the same, but it's not equal to because they are equal. If in comparison we do just b, we get a value of true, because we know that a is not equal to, absolutely not equal to b. So in this case, we've got the same type on both ends, but if we want to make sure that the type is equal, then we do need to use that. There's a few other comparison operators. So there's the greater than sign. So is a greater than b? A is equal to 5, b is equal to 4. So let's say true. Is a less than b? What do you think the value here is going to be, the Boolean return value? We see that that's false. We can also check to see if it's equal to or greater than. So let's increment b by 1. And so now we know that the value of b is 5, the value of a is 5. So let's check to see if a is greater than b, and we get back false. And the reason that's false is because a actually isn't greater than b because they're equal. And this is where we can do a comparison, and we can check to see if a is greater than or equal to b. And as well, we can also change this to less than, and we can see that a is less than or equal to b, and that comes back true. So now that we've seen the comparison operators in action, we are going to also show you one other operator, and this is the only JavaScript operator. It takes 3 different values that you can use it, and it's actually a shortcut for the if statement, which we are going to be looking at later on. So the ternary operator basically gives us the ability to compare a condition, so either true or false, and if we get back true, then it's going to give us the first expression, and if we get back false, it's going to give us the second expression. So let's set this up. I'm going to call it so it's ternary. So that's actually with an N, ternary operator. So I'm just going to call it my ternary, and I'm going to equal it to, so this is where I'm going to have a condition. So any number of these conditions that we looked at, depending on what we're returning here, if it's true or false and so on. I'm also going to add in that variable for C. I'm going to add in that string value of 5. So let's add something in here, and we'll do a quick comparison operator in here. So we're going to bracket around those so that we can know that we can complete that condition. So let's do if A is equal to C, then what we want to do, the output that we want to have is we want to have equal. And if it's not equal, then we're going to say not. So basically, let's go out and let's refresh the page. And I know this looks a little bit complex right now, but we can output the value of my ternary, and we can see that the value is actually equal. So we're doing a computation here using the ternary. We're using the conditional operators here, and we're outputting a result depending on what the condition is. And this is a great example of how Boolean can be used within JavaScript to provide a powerful option for creating conditions, where it can simply do a condition, a check there, and return back either true or false, and depending on what gets returned back. So we can also say that maybe this could be true and maybe this could be false, and these aren't Boolean values, these are actually going to be the string values. So we can just as easily set that up here, and then we could go back and we can output that value and see that it's true. So this is the part where we're going to have another exercise, and this exercise is going to involve the prompts again, but what I want you to do is to evaluate the 2 numbers that have been entered into the prompts and to see which one is bigger. So we can say that we're going to check to see if the first number, A, is going to be larger than the second number, and if it is, then we're going to come up with a customized message, and we're going to output that one in an alert. So pause the video and try it out for yourself. Open up your editor and create the two prompts asking for the two numbers, numeric values. And remember again that the numbers coming in from the prompts, they're going to be string values. So if we're making any type of comparison here, we should convert them into numbers. So the same thing that we did in the previous exercise, and then do that ternary operator where we're evaluating that, and depending on what it comes back, either true or false, enter in a customized string message and then have an alert. So pause the video, go ahead, try it out, and I'm going to show you the solution coming up. So I hope you had the opportunity to try this out for yourself, because it is really important to give it a go and work with JavaScript. So I'm just going to call this one first and prompt, next one prompt. So A and B, and this one is going to be second. I'm going to get rid of C because we don't need to use that. So we're just going to have this one, and maybe I'm going to call it message. So what we want to do is we want to compare the first value of A, which is A, to the second value, which is B, and we want to see which one is bigger. So we're going to check to see if A is bigger than B, and if A is actually bigger than B, then that means that this is true and A is larger. And maybe we can also equal out the value of A just to make it a little bit more interesting, where we're concatenating out those values there. Also remember that we do want to switch these to numbers. So I'm going to create a fairly complex statement here. So it is going to have a lot of what we've learned in the previous lessons. And next, or maybe we can do first is larger. First is larger, and then over here, first is smaller than. And this time, let's concatenate B into there. So it doesn't matter that they're not going to be numbers because we're outputting them as strings anyway. And then lastly, let's add in our ever favorite alert message to the user. So let's go ahead and try this out in the browser. Don't forget to add that second bracket around there. So now let's go out to the browser. I can minimize this as well. And we see when we refresh the page, so we're being asked for the first number. So this time, let's enter in a large number there. And the second number, let's make this one smaller. And we see that first is larger because it's a 10, and we know that it's larger than the second number. We can, of course, try this again. And this time, let's try a small number for first and a really large number for second. And we see that first is smaller than the second number, which was the number that we entered. So I hope you did have an opportunity to try this out for yourself. And this is the beginnings of what JavaScript can do. We see that we're creating those interactions. We're doing something with the inputs that the user has inputted, and we're returning back a dynamically generated message back to the user depending on what they're inputting. So creating that complete interaction with the user that's coming in to interact with our web application. So in the next lesson, we're going to look at logical operators, and I'm going to show you even more that you can do with your JavaScript code. So that's coming up. Welcome back. In this lesson, we're looking at logical operators. So they're going to allow us to extend what we could do with the comparison operators. I've set up a few variables here. A equals to 5, B equals 10, C equals 5. So go ahead and open up your browser, and we're going to try a few different things out here. So we know that A is equal to 5. So we saw previously where we can do A equals 5, and we can see that that's true. With the logical operators, we can apply some additional logic to that. So we can do A equal to 5, and then we're not going to close off this bracket quite yet, and we're going to use AND. So what AND is going to do is this is going to force us to check to see if this one is true and this one is true. So we'll check to see if A is equal to C. So notice that I've only got the two equal signs there. So what do you think the return value here is going to be for if A is equal to 5 and if A is equal to C? So if you said true, you're correct. But what if we actually do the absolute value if A is equal to 5, but the types are the same, A and C? So what do you think is going to happen here? And if you said false, you're correct, because both of these need to be true in order for the response to be true. So let's clear that up, and we can also extend it to multiple values. So we can do if A is equal to 5 and A is equal to C, and we can also do one more as well. We could do as many as we want, and that's really the nice thing about logical operators, is that you can add in as many as needed in order to apply your logic. So this time let's do B, and we'll check to see if B is equal to, and this time let's do A times 2, because we know the value of B is 10, A is 5. So basically we know that if we multiply 5 times 2, we're going to get 10, and this value is going to be true. We can also use the OR. So the way that we could use this, so I'm going to remove some of these. And we know that A is not absolutely equal to C. So we know that if we do the AND, we get a false there. But if we use the OR, so this is going to be different, because this is going to give us the ability to check to see if any one of these is true. And if any one is true, then we're going to get a response back of true. So that's the big difference between AND and OR, that when we're using AND, they all have to be the same. They all have to be true, or they're going to come back as false. So everything has to be true. And with the OR, only one has to be true, and that will return back a value of true. And the way to get false is if all of them are false, and then of course over here, if one of these is false, we're going to return back false. We can also use the not. So you might see this as well sometimes, where there's this exclamation mark and then there's a statement. So we can do to check to see if A is absolutely available equal to C. And this is basically reversing the results. So typically we know that the result for this would be false, because A and C, the data types are different, but we see that when we put that exclamation mark in front, then it actually flips the Boolean value. So instead of returning back false, it's going to return back true. So there's quite a bit here to take in, and applying logic within code is really essential skill when you're coding, because it always comes down to being able to create these types of statements and apply that logic. And this is what can take actions and create some type of results within your programming language. So now let's try another exercise. And in this case, let's do multiple values, and we're going to see if it's coming back true or false. So I've created some statements here in JavaScript where I'm putting them into the console, and what do you think the results are going to be? So either they're going to be true or false, and what I want you to do now is to take a look at what's being output here in the console and try to guess to see what that output is going to be. So I've added in a couple other values in here. I added in the ternary operator here. That's checking to see the modulus, seeing if it's greater than 0, and checking to see returning odd or even. So take a look at this code, pause the video, and let me know which ones are true and which ones are false within these console log messages. And I'll pause the video here, and I'll show you the results coming up. I hope you had the opportunity to take a look at these statements and determine if they're going to be true or false. So let's start with this first one here. Type of A is equal to number. So what do you think this one is going to be? Remember, A is equal to 5, and it is a number. This value here is actually going to be a string. So what do you think is going to be the result here? Do you think that type of A is equal to number? And if you said true, you are correct. This one is true. The next one, type of C. So we know that C is a string, type of number, and we've got type of number. So do you think that type of number is equal to type of C? Do you think that they're equivalent? True or false? And if you said true on that one, you are correct, because we're looking at type of number, and as I said before, number is actually going to be a string. So we're actually looking at type of, not that we're looking at type of number, we're looking at type of string, and this is going to be returned back as a string. Type of C is a string as well. So you can see that when you type that in over here within the console, we see type of string, type of number, they're both strings. Lastly, we've got a really long statement here where we're checking to see if D is equal to odd. So we have to evaluate what the results of this statement are going to be in order to determine if this is true or false. And remember, we're using ands here only, so they all have to evaluate to be true. We can't have any that are false, or ever otherwise this whole statement is going to go false. So what do you think the result here is? Do you think it's going to be true or false? And if you said true, you are correct. So I had set them all to be true. All these statements are true. So we're incrementing B plus 1. So we're returning the result here of B. So this is 11 modulus 5. We know 5 goes into 11 twice, has a remainder of 1. So we know that 1 is greater than 0. So we're returning back a value of odd for D. Next, we can look at B, and we can see if B is greater than 10, and it actually is greater than 10 because the current value is 11. So we are greater than 10. So this is true as well. And we see that B is greater than or equal to A times 2. So A is still 5 times 2 is 10. And we know that B is greater than or equal to 10. So this one is true as well. So I go back out here and refresh it, and we can see that all of those console messages equate to being true. So do try it out for yourself and challenge yourself and see what different operators between the different comparison operators, as well as applying some logical operators, and see what types of challenges you can assign for yourself. You can also make it really super interesting by applying even the not. So the not is another one that we can apply multiple times. So we can do something like if B is less than 10, and we can add that in. And this one will still be true because we know that B is actually greater than 10, but the not is actually giving us the ability to flip it around. So do try it out for yourself and create some interesting challenges and see if you can guess what the value is going to be, what the Boolean value is going to be on the return of the statements.